A number of things are going on around the world, and we'll be talking about those. And we've also got a special guest as well. We'll be talking about an important issue that's going on in the world as well. So, definitely looking forward to the conversation with Dr. Raymond Wiggins, and we'll see which of our regular panelists show up. I did see that one of them just showed up recently. It was on his first cup of coffee and everything, but definitely we'll see how things go and all along those lines. We know that one of our founders has moved to Spain, and as a matter of fact, I think he's back in Spain after having been in the Utah area because he'd come back toward the U.S. That being Nick Palveda. But then I'm wondering how he's doing, and I think he was closer to Barcelona, but it does look like parts of Spain are underwater because they were saying that the Valencia flooding, the Spanish Prime Minister has said a devastating episode not over after dozens were killed. As a matter of fact, they were saying the victims were trapped like rats, and 63 were dead after a year of rain fell in 8 hours in Valencia. So, like I said, I'm not sure if that's one of the areas that Nick was living at or considering living at. But if he makes it in, we'll see how he's doing in his part of the world. But severe weather threatens the plains while deadly flooding slams Spain. But definitely that's something that we're seeing in terms of weather related news and all along those lines. And the Israeli military hit the Gaza town for the third time in days, killing dozens, according to officials. And northern Gaza's Beit Lahal is declared a disaster area amid the Israeli siege. So that's something else that we're seeing as the strike on Gaza buildings targeted spotters and was aimed at toppling structure. So that's something that we're seeing as the war in the Middle East continues as well. And drones hit Nayahari, a IDF warns Lebanese to flee Baalbek as U.S. mediators are heading to that region. So Israel orders immediate evacuation of southern and eastern Lebanon. So there, like I said, we're seeing a number of conflicts going on in that world. And of course, we're still seeing the battle in Ukraine as Russia continues their invasion. Has been going on for a over a year and all along those lines. So definitely, the Kremlin has falsely denied North Korean military uh, joining Russia's war in Ukraine. That's what Voice of America Asia is saying, and they're saying that they are denying that, but definitely they're saying, according to USA Today, chaos as Russia tries to absorb the North Korean troops, according to Ukraine spies. So we'll definitely see how this all plays out as well. And definitely, like I said, a lot's going on even in Canada. So Canada is alleging Indian officials ordered a campaign against Sikh separatists. So Canada is alleging Indian minister behind the plot to target Sikh separatists. So definitely, we knew that there had been some conflicts between Canada and India, and that looks like one of those conflict zones as well. So, like I said, we'll see how this all goes on. And definitely, as I said yesterday, Hezbollah has named a new leader to replace Nasrallah. And definitely, we'll see what this new leader named Qassam has to say about that particular conflict as well. So, like I said, a number of things going on in the world in the terms of conflicts. And the banning the UNRWA will lead to a vacuum and more suffering for Palestinians, according to that agency's chief. So, definitely, we know that there have been uh, Gaza apparently learned of Israel's decision to ban the UNRWA, which is a relief agency, and all along those lines. And the UK's Labour government is raising taxes by £40 billion in a new budget plan. So we know that the budget has been an important issue even here in the US elections that are less than a week away. So definitely it'll be taking place on Tuesday, the 5th of November. A lot of folks will be glad that those ads will be off TV and all along those lines. So we'll see how this all plays out. And if we have a returning president, if that is the case with Trump, or if we have a new president in the case of Kamala Harris. So, like I said, it's still neck and neck according to many of the polls and many of the predictions. But we'll find out in less than a week who our president is that will be succeeding Biden, whether that is his vice president or whether that is the former president. So all of this will be sorted out in the very near future as early voting is continuing. I believe that's continuing till Saturday and everything. And then, of course, election day is on the 5th. And Typhoon Kangri takes aim at Taiwan and everything. So definitely they're saying that it is a super typhoon and it could sweep almost the whole island. So they're expecting it to make landfall on Thursday. And France backs Morocco in a dispute over the Western Sahara. So France's Macron and the Moroccan king have cemented reconciliation with business deals, and Macron pledges French investment in the disputed Western Sahara in a speech to Morocco's parliament. And the ancient lost Mayan city with pyramids was discovered accidentally by students. So a lost Mayan city with temple pyramids and plazas has been discovered in Mexico. So, like, hey, you go out on a trip, you might accidentally discover a whole ruin or something like that. So, definitely we'll see what goes on in space. And Biden is calling for investigations into the country of Georgia's election results. So, fears of war with Russia overshadowing EU hopes for voters. So, Georgia has begun investigating its disputed election, but the opposition calls the probe into question. And Mount Fuji is snowless for the longest time on record after a sweltering Japan summer. So there's still no snow on Mount Fuji, forecasters say, and that is setting a record. So Japan's iconic Mount Fuji has yet to see snow this season, breaking a 130-year record. So, like I said, they're looking for that snow, and it hasn't come yet, even though that is something that usually comes on and all along those lines. And Biden suggested that Trump supporters are garbage after a comic's insult of Puerto Rico. And some folks are saying that Biden may have handed Trump a big assist with his garbage gaffe and everything along those lines. So, Walson, since we want everyone amid Biden's comment cleanup and everything, and we know that whole comment about the deplorables cost folks elections in the past and everything. So we'll see if this is something else that impacts as well. And Trump rallies in a majority Latino Pennsylvania city after the rally that Biden was alluding to and everything. So not so warm Trump welcome in Allentown as Puerto Ricans swing away after the offensive rally, or what they feel was offensive. And a 49ers lineman fires back at critics of Tony Hinchcliffe's Puerto Rico joke, seemingly supports Nick Bosi. So definitely a lot of things are going on in that space. And David DePape, the man who attacked Paul Pelosi, has been sentenced to life in prison. And at an Ellipse rally, and I believe that was the location where Trump was at when the January 6th incident took place and everything, Harris tried to paint a contrast with Trump, arguing that it doesn't have to be this way at the Ellipse rally. So Harris gives closing argument speech at the Ellipse, offering a different path than Trump. So Harris calls Trump a threat to democracy, and Biden tried to clarify, as I said earlier, that garbage comment and all along those lines. So if a child needs anti-venom for a snake bite, according to the Washington Post, apparently it costs more than $200,000. So that's a lot of money, and hopefully nobody's out there getting bit by snakes a lot and all along those lines. So definitely a lot's going on, including companies ready to price hikes to offset Trump's global tariff plan should Trump be elected and all along those lines. So like I said, a lot's going on in the world. I'm going to bring in my guest, learn about what he's got going on, and then we'll have some other discussions as well. So definitely, I've also got Steve Rao with me. So let me just bring in Steve really quickly to see if the addition.
I'm here for a few minutes, and then I may meet the vice president briefly, but I'm not going to go to the rally. I'm going to watch it online because I'll be going to WPTF at 3 o'clock to talk with Congressman Nickel, who will be speaking at the event. I'm going to come back tomorrow. We'll just talk about kind of a recap of the speech he gave in Washington yesterday, D.C., and then other issues that you just wrapped up on. The race is tight. I still think the numbers are looking more in favor of Trump right now in North Carolina, but I think it's going to come down to the push. And I think black men are not voting in high enough numbers. Youth vote is down. I think this could turn, I think that could lower turnout in those areas with high levels of Republican turnout early could make the difference for Republicans, because I think if more turnout election day and you couple that with the early voting strategy, That's the key. Is I think it'll be, who comes out to the polls on November 5th with only 2 days left of early voting. So the only other thing I would say as an analyst is, would in this case be those Republicans that silently support Harris. So maybe some of these early votes are not for Trump, and that would show in the return. So I wouldn't say it's over for her yet. I think it's going to be a close race, and we'll be talking about Israel and other things in the world. I'll close out with some really amazing moments that I spent on Monday. I was invited as a guest to the White House to be there for the Diwali reception at the invitation of President Biden and First Lady Joe Biden with other Indian American leaders across the country. It was amazing being recognized as the longest serving Asian at a briefing issue with many of the president's cabinet members, including the Surgeon General of the United States, Vivek Murthy, and a number of others. I'll be talking on Thursday about my visit to the White House, what I learned from it. And it was great to hear from the president, probably one last time. Maybe the last time I spend in the White House. I did ask the president if I could sleep over the night, and he said, well, Steve, it is your house, but you'll have to talk to the Secret Service about that. But it was hard to leave, and they had to turn the lights on twice, and then they all laughed and said, Steve, it's time to go now. So I was the last person to leave. I was the last person to walk out of the White House.
Last person to walk out of the White House. Just really quickly, we do have a guest as well, so I was going to bring in Dr. Raymond Wiggins. And one of the things that Dr. Raymond Wiggins talks about, which has been an issue in some of the swing states, because a number of states were supportive of some of the recreational marijuana use and all along those lines and everything. And I think that even when I learned about Dr. Wiggins, he acknowledged that it was a popular opinion and everything, but I know one of the things you warned against was that this isn't necessarily, and like I said, my few experiences with that particular drug were just dealing with brownies and everything. Can't, like Bill Clinton, I never did the whole smoking thing, just don't like the whole nature of smoking, whether it's a cigarette or that particular thing in terms of marijuana and all along those lines, or cannabis. But I would be lying if I said that I hadn't had a brownie or two in my life and everything. But you talk about how this is not necessarily the kind of cannabis in terms of levels that used to exist, say, in the Woodstock era. But like I said, even in the swing states or even non-swing states, because I don't know that Colorado is a swing state, but that is an issue that even some of our politicians have been paying attention to as well, because it was a popular issue that folks were campaigning on their support or non-support of such things, just like folks have dealt with immigration and folks have dealt with abortion. But like I said, when I learned about you through some of the sources that I have and everything along those lines, I know that that was an important issue for you. So if you just wanted to share a little bit about your thoughts as to why we need to be concerned, even from a health standpoint, because I know you brought up things when I read about you about its impact for folks if they are going through certain medical procedures and everything else along those lines. So if you could just share a little bit about that. And then, like I said, I think Steve might have bounced off, he's got political dealings and everything, but we do have other panelists that might have some questions as well. But if you could just share a little bit about why you are concerned about the levels of the THC that is in recreational marijuana.
Absolutely, Mark. Great to be with you today. Marijuana is definitely not what it was when our grandparents were alive. If you look back at Woodstock, 1969, the average THC percent, which we call the potency, the average THC percent was 1 to 2% at that point. The really good stuff, you might be able to find some 3%. If you fast forward to 1995, you're looking at about 4 to 6%. Today, we're looking at 22 and even 23% on average. There are some shops that say that they have up to 46% THC in some of their strains of cannabis. And if you're talking about concentrates, you're talking about over 90%, and some claim to be up to 99%. Well, why is that important? If you get over anything above about 10%, that's called high potency THC, or high potency cannabis, high potency marijuana. And when you're using that, you're going to have a much increased risk of addiction, a 4 times increased risk of addiction. If you're looking at the old marijuana, it was really mainly a psychological addiction. And psychological addiction is something that can be devastating to some people. But when you look at today's marijuana, you're looking at a true physical addiction, and it carries all the same risk and the same problems that things like opioids and cocaine and things like that can cause, because it's such a high risk of addiction. It's 30% of people with the high potency marijuanas, 30% are addicted. And if you look at young people, it's 46%. So almost half of those who use marijuana that are young are addicted. And again, does it really matter that they're addicted? Well, yeah, there's cannabis withdrawal syndrome. There's a lot of physical problems when you withdraw. All the tremors and the headaches and the nausea, the vomiting, all those things that you see with other drugs, you see with cannabis or marijuana as well. And it also causes problems with your brain, with your heart, with your lungs, with your mental health. That's a huge one. And I can go into any of those in much more detail if you'd like me to.
No, I appreciate that and everything. Well, one of the things that I remember that used to be said in the past and everything was that marijuana, or cannabis as it's now more commonly known as, and everything, could be a gateway drug and gateway into harder drugs and everything. And I know that there's been concerns about the fentanyl crisis and even concerns that you just alluded to about opioids and everything like that. But I think that philosophy had kind of gone by the wayside, and some people don't necessarily think that anymore. But as a doctor, and if you want to share some of your medical background and everything, that would definitely help and everything along those lines. But I was just wondering, is that still a concern from your standpoint as a medical practitioner and everything? Because I do remember that even back in the 70s when I was in school, there was this concern that it could lead to harder drugs. I think LSD and some things like that were popular during that time and everything. But is it considered in your mind a gateway drug?
Absolutely. There are a few studies that would disagree with what I'm going to say, but there are countless studies that agree with what I'm about to say. And that's the issue. When I look at studies, probably somewhere between 10 to 20% are going to be against what I say, but the vast majority are going to have the same conclusions that I have. One of the biggest studies, one of the best studies that's out there, looks at 18-year-olds, and it says, are they more likely to be using other drugs down the road? And yes, they're 2.5 times more likely, 2.6 times more likely to be using another drug 3 years down the road. And 98% of what we think of as harder drug users, I really don't think of them as harder drugs. I think marijuana has, especially the newer stuff, has all the same problems as other drugs. But 98% of harder drug users used marijuana in the past. And those who use marijuana daily when they're young are 8 times more likely to be using another illicit drug by the age of 30. So I could just go on and on with statistics about this. But those who say that marijuana is not a gateway drug, it just doesn't comport with the science.
What do you say? Because I know one of the things that you brought up in the publication that I read when I found out about you and everything was this notion that, because there's this notion of drugs and particularly marijuana being used as a aid in medical treatment. I mean, that's part of what people have been arguing for and everything along those lines, not so much the recreational use, but even the use in terms of like helping people in their health care and all along those lines. And you even raised some concerns about that as well. So I just wondering your thoughts as to why you have concerns for those people that want to use it as a form of like pain relief and some other kinds of reasons that they will use marijuana as part of their medical diet if they are suffering from something like cancer or something that is more life-threatening or even terminal.
Yeah, I'm not here to bash anyone that uses, if a cancer, a person with cancer that wants to use and they think it's going to help with their pain, etc. The problem is that that's really it's a placebo effect, and if you really look at pain with marijuana, there's really no good studies that show that there's good pain relief with marijuana. And in fact, if we go back to the cancer, the person who's using with cancer, it decreases your immune system response. Well, whenever you're treating cancer, you're not only using radiation and chemotherapy and surgery and things like that, but you're also having to use the body's natural defenses. And whenever you're using marijuana, it actually decreases significantly our body's natural immune response. And so how can I, as a doctor, tell someone that they should be using marijuana when it's going to decrease their immune response? And there's other better ways to treat pain, especially if it's just a placebo effect, which that's what studies show. And if you look at just about any, or really any of the reasons that people use medical marijuana, there are more studies that are going to show, many times more studies that are going to show there's not a benefit. And I'm not a person who is in in cahoots with the big drug companies, but a lot of the drugs that are out there work way better than what marijuana does.
That's interesting, and all along those lines and everything. You mentioned that and everything. How do you go about your studies and everything? Because one of the things that people have been interested in is, again, and you say you're not and everything, that sometimes studies, whether it's pro or anti a drug, are sometimes backed by the companies, and sometimes that's why people sometimes wonder about the logic behind people's use of certain studies and everything. So are you an independent researcher, or is this stuff you found out in independent research, or do you get like some support from either the government or from certain companies in order to do this research where you're finding this information out?
I get zero from anyone. I have completely done this on my own, and I've spent a lot of money to do it, my own money, to do this research. And if you want to talk about studies that are definitely biased, if you want to look at the studies that Big Marijuana puts out, a lot of those studies are the ones that are pro marijuana, that show a benefit. If you really look at the studies that come from universities that don't get that type of money, those are the studies that show the problem. So I think the reason that the vast majority of that, 20% or so of studies that are out there that show some benefit, the reason they're out there is because of Big Marijuana, which is a huge industry. I mean, we're talking $100 billion a year industry. And there, for instance, in Florida, one Canadian company alone has put in, some estimates are 100 billion, but the lower end estimates are 100 million. The lower end estimates are 70 million that one company alone from Canada has put into the referendum there.
Before I bring in some of the other regular panelists and everything, and they might have some questions as well, one of the things I was curious about is, are you arguing for us to curtail? Because one of the things that people have been saying is that there is this notion that people should go, particularly in rural areas, into the cannabis industry and everything. And just to give full disclosure and all along those lines, my mother was the first president of the Golden Leaf Foundation. And if you study Golden Leaf Foundation, that was some of the money that came out of the tobacco settlement, which some people would argue kind of curtailed the tobacco industry and tried to get people into other type of industries and all along those lines. So she is now retired, Valeria Lee is, and everything, but she was the first president that was trying to get people to go into other businesses, whether that was soybeans, whether that was other kinds of things, but trying to get people out of the tobacco industry. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you would like people not necessarily to go into cannabis, which we know there's been a big push into the cannabis industry, but to maybe curtail it, whether it's either here or in Canada and all along those lines. Is that what I'm hearing from your study and from you as well, is that you would like people to maybe reconsider going into that industry, even though that is sometimes seen as a substitute industry for those that might be coming out of tobacco or some of the other big industries in the agri-tech field and everything?
Yeah, I mean, from my studies and seeing all the dangers of marijuana that I didn't even realize as a doctor were there, several years ago when I started studying this. When I look at that, I see that, if you go from tobacco to marijuana, for instance, there's many times more problems with marijuana than there is with tobacco. So, yeah, I definitely would not like to see people go into that. Of course, I mean, I would love to see them go into soybeans or cotton or whatever, whatever they want to go into otherwise. But I think that they're just causing so many problems. One problem that we don't even think about a lot, but if you look at the number of fatal auto accidents in America, there were 9,400 fatal auto accidents directly attributed to marijuana just in 2022 alone, which is the last year that I have studies at this point. So there's so many problems with it. No, I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, Rick, we've got Rick joining us. We've also got Jim and Eve, and they're both out of the West Coast, and Jacoby, who joins me from.
So Jim and I grew up in the not powerful marijuana era. And so what if somebody's like an old school fan of, wimpy marijuana and, wants to get just a little, you walk into a marijuana boutique in Los Angeles, for instance, and, this stuff's super expensive and it's super powerful. What if you just want a wimpy little high like you used to get in the 80s?
Yeah, first of all, good luck finding it. It's really difficult to find anything less than 10%. But if you do find it, you're still causing all the same problems, maybe not all the same problems, but many of the same problems, just to a lesser extent. So long term, if you look at these people that have been using it for years and years, they started out with the lower potency stuff and it got higher and higher over time. You're looking at decreases in IQ, increases in depression, anxiety, suicide attempts, PTSD. I mean, you can go on and on at all the problems that it causes and exacerbates.
So I as when you started talking, I looked up car crash rates, and I've been told, and I don't know if this is true or not, that crash rates across the whole country, regardless of marijuana laws, are up, and people speculate because COVID ate people's brains, made them angrier and dumber drivers. And then I've got this study from the NIH that says that I've got one study that says that in Colorado, where people get super high, no difference between a non-high state. And then I've got another study that says, yeah, people are crashing more in Colorado.
Yeah, the studies, if again, you can always find something that's going to go against what I'm saying here. But if you look at the preponderance of the evidence, 20% of the studies are going to show, no, there's no difference. About 80% are. And if you look at the preponderance of the evidence, the studies that have legalized medical marijuana, the rates of car crashes go up and fatal car accidents as well. And when you look at recreational use, it's much higher than that. And I could be wrong here. I may not have the exact numbers right, but it's something like 16 to 18% for those states that haven't legalized it, and around 20% for those who have legalized medical, and about 25% for those who have legalized recreational.
What you're saying is that marijuana was involved in 18 to 25% of all car wrecks in states where it's legal.
Yeah, around 25%, 22 to 25, something like that, in states where it's legal. So it's more, they're more common in those states that have legalized marijuana.
What did you say to those folks? I saw that Jim has got a question for you, and I'm actually going to get to him. But I see we've got Shaquille with us as well and everything. We've got other people that have been on this network that may have libertarian views and everything like that. So before I get to Jim, what do you say to those people that basically have that view of what you do in your space is it your business and everything, and probably don't necessarily want you to make a judgment for them? If I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Shaquille, because I think you have some of that background and everything. That's kind of the libertarian view both about sex and marijuana use and a number of other things. It's kind of this view of what you do in your space is your business, and the government and nobody else needs to be trying to regulate that. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Shaquille, since I know that that's more of a libertarian type view and everything. But
I just got here, so perhaps I'll go after Jim because he had his hand up.
Thank you.
Good day, Doctor.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you.
go
And Doctor, I think you're making a very important point here. You know, addiction is a big part of what I work on and deal with on a daily basis. Wrote a book about it, Freedom. And, you know, there's a few things that I want to quibble with as well as ask.
Sure.
You know, I don't think cancer patients are trying to suppress pain as much as they are nausea. And it seems to me that it's very effective with that. I totally agree with you that the high dosage, the content level of the THC has increased, and it represents a problem. And there's no question in my mind that the recreational use in the 70s and 80s did not have the same characteristics. When you talk about the studies that say, hey, hardcore drug users had marijuana in their past, you know, did they also study, did they have tobacco in their past? Did they have alcohol in their past? So we have to be very careful drawing conclusions from something like that, because if you're going to call it a gateway drug, which I resist that urge, I think people that are have tendencies towards addiction are going to get addicted. And, you know, their first use is alcohol. And in the majority of cases of people when I was growing up was tobacco, and then marijuana, then other drugs. So, you know, we have to be careful drawing conclusions from that sort of stuff. And also, I don't mind the placebo effect. If you think it works and it works, great. So that's fine. But the answer to the potency level is regulations. To make this process available, regulated. And the same thing we do with alcohol. You know, alcohol was a very dangerous thing. You know, we could back in the 30s, you could find yourself dead drinking alcohol that you didn't know was what it contained. It's the same thing with drugs in general. We have no idea what some of the things that I took in the 70s really contained. You know, it's you know, the kind of things that we're dealing with here have to be done gently and with compassion, because with these people, when you're talking about addicts, you know, we fall into judgment, and we lack compassion when we're dealing with them. So there's no way that marijuana at lower levels of THC content should be regulated any differently than tobacco or alcohol. And to treat them as a hard drug is just it's a misuse of our resources. If we could regulate it, control the dosage, and the fact of the matter is, you can still grow it in your backyard and have it safe. So, you know, there are ways to obtain marijuana today that is lower content, lower potency. So these are the things that I wanted to address. But my main point is to congratulate you on your message. This high potency THC stuff is not what I dealt with. It's very different, and it can lead to severe consequences, including the withdrawal that you mentioned. These are the things that we need to treat and help people recover. Because my message is to empower people to recover. And if you can do it, every human being has the power and potential to recover. And so if you find yourself addicted to anything, you can recover from it, but you need support rather than harsh judgment and discouragement or being thrown into jail. These are not the solutions.
I agree with you on the vast majority of what you said there. Definitely compassion is the way to go. I wish I could agree with you that the low potency marijuana is something that I could agree with is a good thing. I really can't when I really look at all the studies. I will completely agree with you that the high potency marijuana causes many more problems. And if we're going to just talk about that, you know, if we're just going to talk about the high potency, then I would like to get rid of that. And definitely there's no studies that show benefits for the high potency marijuana when you're talking about medical marijuana.
Yeah, I agree. Just regulate it. Keep it low dosage.
There are studies though that also show that when you regulate, even in the shops, when people go in and test it, there's a lot of things in there. The potencies aren't what they say it is, and there's a lot of problems with other things that are in there that are not supposed to be. So
Yeah, that's an
if I had a
enforcement
choice
issue.
I'm sorry, if I had a choice
Yeah.
between the two, yes, I'm going to go to a shop, but no, it's not completely safe.
Before I get to you, Rick, and everything, I just wanted to introduce Dr. Wiggins to one of the other founders, because I did mention that Nick is back in Spain, but Kim is the other founder of this particular network, Pod TV, and all along those lines, and she may have some thoughts, because I know that she's been a advocate for victims of particularly sex crimes and all along those lines and everything, but she's been an advocate just of law reform. I think that that's a fair statement to say, and all along those lines, Kim, and everything along those lines. So she may have some questions for you as well. But one of the things that I alluded to when I brought in Shaquille and Kim, and definitely I see Rick got his hand up and everything, what do you say to those people that are basically like have that view of what I do is my business and it doesn't need to be regulated? Because like I said, that's my understanding, and I could have it wrong, of some libertarian views, whether that's around sex or whether that's around drugs or whatever, that they have this feeling that, what they do in their own house is their business and the government doesn't need to regulate it and it doesn't need to be controlled.
Well,
what is your answer?
sorry, just to clarify, if you're attributing that to me, I have never said it shouldn't be regulated. I didn't say that.
I wasn't attributing
I'll wait for others to speak, but I'll jump in when you want me to. But I'll let the doctor answer the question.
To you, I was attributing it to libertarian views in general. I never attributed it to you directly, Shaquille. But I was just saying some libertarians. Maybe I should say some libertarians.
Well, let me come in and just sort of tell you what my position is. I think that there are significant risk factors in most noxious substances, including marijuana, and there's no doubt that marijuana today is extremely more potent than what it was before. Although, obviously, being born in 1983, I don't have a reference point, and also not somebody who used drugs. I don't really have a reference point, but that's certainly what the numbers show. One of the concerns that I have, if we look at Australia, and I used to own a bar in Australia, what we saw was that in the state that I was in, a lot of workers were working up on the mines, and so they were flying in and flying out. They'd have a 2-week on shift and a 2-week off shift, and marijuana would stay in their system for 6 weeks, so they wouldn't be able to do their drug tests and pass. So what would they do? Well, they didn't stop taking drugs. They turned to harder drugs such as cocaine, methamphetamine, stuff like that, because that's out of your system in a few days. And you're beginning to see, they can test the sewage and see like what the approximate usage is, across Australia, and of course the wealthy suburbs in Sydney and Melbourne is just awash with harder narcotics. So I would dare suggest that if you legalize it, regulate it, put some taxes on it, that would make it a little bit safer. I know that purists would suggest that, no, you shouldn't let people have access to it at all. But people are going to. People want to do it. So I think having a sort of zero tolerance position, I just don't think that's going to work. And certainly we do, you guys, not us, you guys did that with prohibition. And that didn't work. People kept drinking, and I would dare suggest the 21st Amendment made things a lot safer for people when alcohol became regulated and taxed. So I totally respect what you're saying. I think that certainly there are risk factors, but my personal preference is I think it should be legal. I think that other drugs, I said I don't take drugs, so I don't really care, but I think that they should be legalized, regulated, and I think that would solve a lot of the problems.
Yeah, the problem is that when you legalize it and you tax it, that actually makes the illegal industry flourish even more, because more people use, and then the people aren't going to pay the taxes. If you look at California, basically every state that has legalized, the illegal industry has flourished, and many more people use. Just early on, when any state legalizes, you're probably looking at a 25% increase in the actual use. Well, what are the problems with that? What are the problems with someone using it and saying, well, I'm going to stay at home? Well, a lot of those people drive, and they cause the deaths and the just catastrophic problems with driving. There's a great increase in violence. domestic violence is tremendously
Oh, come
higher
Come on.
in both victims and absolutely, if you look at the studies,
You
sir.
want to talk about alcohol?
Alcohol too. I'm not saying alcohol is great,
I
but
think
if you look at
anything
the
that
studies,
Regulate
impairs
tax
the
alcohol.
brain.
causes a great increased risk, and this is something that is just now coming out. There's over 2,500 studies that show increased violence with marijuana. 2,500, and
At
yet
that
no one talks
dosage,
about
at
it.
that dosage, I agree with you. But you know, at
They
lower
have
doses,
shown
people
an
don't get
increase
violent.
in violence. I
But
think
I think
anytime
you've got to
you
ask the question.
impair the brain, I think that there is an opportunity where it could go one way or the other. Most people always considered it calming, but there were several incidences that occurred here just in North Carolina, and the people were on marijuana or cannabis, and they committed some pretty rough crimes. We noticed in domestic violence a trend rising in that area. Of course, you know, everyone says that it calms you, it relaxes you, and I've witnessed it. I see people who use it. I'm not one to use something that alters my brain like that, though I have drank. But I think that anything that impairs you in any sort of way needs to be managed a little bit better. And right now, I can go through the airport and I can see employees, you know, I guess doing CBD. You know, they're smoking it. You could smell it all over the place. I just don't think it should be that free usage, streetwise or public wise. And everybody is doing it because I can smell it. Like, it stinks to me. It smells like a skunk to me. But you should have had Jim Eade on, not Jim Eade. You
I
should
don't
have
know what quality
had,
they're smoking, Kimberly, but smells like a skunk.
Jim,
I did invite
right,
Jeff
but you
on.
should have had
I had
Jeff
beer with
Eichen.
them.
I did
You should
invite
have had
Jeff
Jeff
on.
Eichen on here because, you know, he has fought and helped work with freeing several people who were, I don't think people should be sent to life for marijuana. And there were, and that's been his goal, is to help free those people because it was nonviolent crimes and they were sent up the river for life in those private prisons. So I think that, you know, there needs to be a balance of common sense, and it's not being used because I think we had a law that over restricted it. Now we have a law that everyone just thinks you can use it anytime, including driving, and that scares me. That scares me a lot.
Just really quickly, Kim, Jacoby, and then Rick.
Are there
Jacoby first, and then
Okay,
Rick.
yeah. Go
I
ahead.
think
Joe.
Rick was first, though.
there you go.
Jacoby, yeah.
Well, my question is because it seems like we're arguing against being able to regulate a substance that is honestly in our society and only growing in usage within our society. It has, and not to get into the socioeconomic part or even the effects on different minority communities where the overregulation has separated many families and done so many things in terms of different minority communities. My question comes to, if we're arguing against regulating it, a product that's being used within our society that is only growing in usage in our society, how do you control that if you do not regulate or monitor its usage? Because if you're just, from what I'm understanding from your argument, is that it causes so many problems, we need to do all this. Well, it's being used. Why not regulate it to allow individuals like alcohol to use a controlled substance in the way that it does not destroy families, does not destroy a whole bunch of stuff? Because if you're just saying keep it illegal, that's not helpful to our society.
No,
Well,
it's
I
not.
would
I agree.
respectfully disagree with you. I wish I could agree with you on that. We'll have to respectfully disagree. But the reason that I disagree is because whenever you make it legal, especially our young people think that it's safe. They think that legality equates to being safe. And so more of them use it. And so in practice, what happens is when you legalize it, many more people are using. And unfortunately, that hurts every community when we do that,
I
including
Talk
those
about
who aren't using it.
decriminalizing.
But I think what you're missing though is that people are using it regardless of its legality or not.
Yeah.
And
But
if
those
you're
people
not
don't
going
missing
to,
that point,
hold
Toby.
on,
I
hold
mean,
on.
less
If
than
you're
a
not,
third.
hold on real quick. If you're just going to keep it illegal and arrest people for using it in a non-violent manner, all you're doing is creating more people, more criminals in our society that are not criminals. You're harming society by just saying, hey, look, these individuals smoke weed, so they need to go to jail. That shouldn't be. Kids are using it regardless of its legality or not. So
Regulated.
at least you make it legal. You're decriminalizing it so you're not harming families and kids. You're actually able to regulate it better by even its standards on a substance level. Yes, there are always going to be people that are going to go out and actually use the substance illegal and buy it cheaper. Sure. But you're actually controlling those individuals who are going to be curious anyway and not going down this criminal route, but at least buying cigarettes. Cigarettes went down this
By that logic, Jacoby, you might as well legalize and regulate fentanyl.
No,
Rick
Shaq,
has
that's,
his
that's
hand up.
illogical because
Hold on,
fentanyl is
I
not
want
this
to get
whole
to our
thing.
guest.
You're going
Hold
down a
on.
different path.
By your
Hold on a
logic.
second.
Chat, let Rick
All
go
right.
next. You're
No,
bringing up a
Rick
whole
had a
different
question, but I
rabbit
do want to
All
make
right,
a
all right,
clarification.
all right.
Yeah, just really quickly, Dr. Wiggins, if I'm understanding you correctly,
All right,
and
so-
it kind of
so-
comes back to what I'm sorry, Rick, to what Jacoby was saying, because a lot of people that are users of marijuana and everything are able to, if I can just put it bluntly, game the system or kind of like beat the system and everything. So how would you deal with that, Dr. Wiggins? Because I know a lot of people that even that are athletes, and I know that Jacoby and I think even Shaquille has dealt with some athletes as well and everything. They will find a way to beat those tests that you were talking about earlier and everything, even in the employment situation. So if we're regulating it, how, in your mind, could we govern that, for lack of a better term? Because I know a lot of people that are users. Like I said, I'm not a user either and everything, but I do know people that know how to game the system better than I could ever game the system.
Yeah, if that question was for me, I believe it was.
It was.
Okay. How can we keep people from gaming the system? I mean, people are going to always try to game the system, but whenever we regulate it more, I think that we're lessening the number of people that are actually using it, and we're decreasing harm overall. And I think if you look at the studies, the statistics, I think whenever it's illegal, that's when the fewest people are using and fewer people are being harmed.
Rick, you had a question, and then Jim. Rick
Are
first.
there people? Are there people? Let me. Are there people who can safely be regular users? For instance, I know a couple people who suffer from debilitating anxiety who function a lot better if they're a little chilled by getting high. People on the autism spectrum where medical marijuana helps, and like Brittany Griner, who's the 6'8", 210-pound professional basketball player. She's the one who got thrown into prison in Russia. I would assume that when she got high, that was because her body hurt like hell from basketball.
Yeah, the problem is that the anxiety and pain, marijuana, when you come down from it, it causes increased anxiety. Yes, when you're using, it's going to be less. But are you going to be using 24/7 to reduce your anxiety? Are you going to be using 24/7 to reduce your pain? And again, the pain that's questionable as to whether or not it really decreases pain. But let's just say that it does. Are you going to use 24/7 to keep that pain down? Whenever you come down from it, you're going to have hyperalgesia, which is increased pain. So overall, you're going to have more pain whenever you're using. You're going to have more anxiety, and you're going to have more depression and all the other problems. You're causing problems with your brain and with your heart and with your lungs and with your mental health. All the other problems that you have from recreational marijuana, you also get from medical marijuana as well.
Jim, I think you had a question and everything. And by the way, Dr. Wiggins, when you get a chance, I know you've written a book on this. I know Shaquille and others sometimes buy books from people that have been guess and everything, whether we agree with them or disagree with them. So if you'll definitely tell the title of
I've-
the book. after
I've
Jim.
already been on your website. I've already looked at your book, so I'll be ordering one. And it's great to see somebody from Texas on our show. So to counter all of these California liberals like Jim, but I'll hand it over to Jim.
I grew up in the Northeast, by the way. And the idea that we're talking about here, and I want to reinforce that I think the doctor's message is very powerful and valid, that high potency THC has all the problems that he's been describing. And that's why I am pro-regulation. But all the things that he's talking about can also be attributed to alcohol. And we tried to...
We agree, Jim.
Pardon? Yeah.
We agree.
Yeah. And so in tobacco, I'll defer to your wisdom and studies on that. But, we used to have, when I was growing up, tobacco commercials all the time. And, I can still remember some of them. And so, the fact is if you don't promote it and you regulate it, it will have a less harmful effect on society in general. And all of the things that you could say about prohibition, you can say about, and we're not trying to legalize so much as decriminalize, because we're creating criminals out of people that aren't criminals. They may be addicted, but they're not criminals. And so what we really need to do is to treat these people, to give them the options, to let them know that there are resources available to them, to free themselves from what's weighing them down and harming our society. And once they know these options exist, these are the things that we want to promote. There should be more commercials about them, but there's not money in it. So you really have this problem in our society at large. When we're trying to keep people from getting addicted to drugs, to alcohol, to nicotine, these are hard problems and they're not easy to solve. But to my mind, the only way that you're going to do less harm to the society, and you're not going to eliminate harm, it's always going to be baked in. But the only way to do it is to regulate it, control the content, control the amount of THC that's available, to make it available, to tax it. So there is a price that you pay for using, but you should, if you can go to your corner store and get nicotine and alcohol, there's no reason that you can't get a well-regulated marijuana product as well. And all of these things that that are bad about marijuana apply in spades to alcohol, which is much more pervasive in our society. So if we're not going to outlaw alcohol, I don't want to talk about outlawing marijuana, cannabis. These are the types of things that we need to address as a society with compassion, with knowledge. And you're providing a lot of background. And I'm totally down with the high potency THC. This is just a problem that, I work with people who have dealt with this. And it's not something that I experienced in my own life. But I don't even take Tylenol now. I don't take anything. So, the idea that, you're stuck or you're going to progress to a worst case scenario, this is something that I have to challenge. What you need to do is, as a society, make it aware that these things have dangers and to educate people that these dangers exist. Don't get behind the wheel if you're impaired.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that, because a friend of mine's husband died because somebody drove impaired, and it didn't have to happen that way, right? Like, the person has been an abuser of substance most of his life, has been in and out of the court, and they still didn't send him to jail. And they should have, because this is an impairment. This is what I tell people. It's still an impairment of the brain, just like alcohol. But, one of the ways they control it, decriminalize it and control it, is by adding tremendous taxes on it, making it, affordable for those who probably can only afford it. But they need to control it a little bit. I don't think you can stop it. And I agree with Jatovi. It's too much out there now. But if you control it, The criminals are not making money on it. The independents are not making money on it. If you control it like you do tobacco and alcohol, the children are not using it. But self-medication is probably the biggest problem we have in this country, and that needs to come to an end. But I think it's Shaq's turn.
It is Shaq's turn.
So yeah, just sorry, I'm going to say something that's totally inappropriate at the end. So just on your comments, Dr. Wiggins. Look, personally, like I see where you're coming from, and I agree with you. I agree with you on the harm, absolutely, and I think it's something that we need to deal with. And all over the world, all over through Europe, the UK, where I'm a citizen, Australia, where I'm a citizen. This is kind of the debate, right? Canada, America, it's sort of the debate between legalizing it, decriminalizing it, or making it more severe as far as penalties are concerned. I personally would go a step further than Jim. I don't think we should decriminalise it. I think it should be legalised for the very reason that Kimberly mentioned. I think we should just tax it, regulate it, make sure it's safer and higher quality for people. But having worked in this space and having researched it the way you have, how would you compare drug use in places where it has been legalised, for example, in Amsterdam, where people are able to access this. There's not really any penalties for it. It's perfectly legal. We would talk about alcohol. If you take a place like Austria or Germany, kids can actually drink beer and wine at the age of 14. Most of Europe, people can drink wine at any age with their parents' permission. So it's very common to see a 8-year-old kid sipping on a glass of wine at dinner with their parents. And what we're seeing, as far as I can tell, is a decrease in the alcohol usage and the drug usage in youth and in young adults as a result of the fact that they've been exposed to it. And there's no big secret. There's no big amazing thing. So how would you respond to that? Secondly, I would go even further as to say that perhaps we should make it mandatory, because I think that certain places, like where the politicians hang out, would probably be better off if they were stoned all the time. And lastly, maybe I could convince you liberals that Trump is right. Put tariffs on overseas marijuana, manufacture it in the United States, and you get a cheaper tax rate. How good's that? What a plan.
Trump doesn't say that.
I said it for him, Jim, okay?
Yeah, I'm with you.
So you're in Texas and everything.
Yeah, if you look at Amsterdam, they do a lot of studies there, and a lot of the great studies against marijuana are coming from the Netherlands, from Norway, Sweden. The great studies that show the harm in literally millions of people. And so I think if you really look at it, it's showing great harm. It's not showing that it's helping.
So what would you suggest as an alternative? I mean, one of the things I'm concerned about, just some background, my family are in medicine and my mother, for example, works in mental health. So, we talk about drug use quite a lot when we're talking about stuff. And, one of the things that concerns me is that they will prescribe things like Valium to people who are alcoholics. And I'm like, well, is that better? I mean, I don't know. I would tend to think that that's probably not. But one of the reasons they're giving them Valium is for the anti-anxiety effect. What would you say to people that, perhaps are predisposed to wanting to use marijuana? I know you mentioned about violence before. The question is it the marijuana that's causing people to be violent, or the people with propensity to be violent, are they attracted to marijuana? But those people that would ordinarily be attracted to marijuana or any other type of substance, what would you suggest in the alternative, that they would turn to a regulated pharmaceutical drug instead, or what's your suggestion there?
No, I think if you're talking about using marijuana to get off of other drugs, you wind up becoming addicted to both marijuana and the other drug as well. So that's one thing to think about. Another thing I'd like to talk about is the decrease in the use of marijuana with regulation. I just don't think I can stress that enough. We have to regulate it to decrease the use, and then I think we're going to have many times less problems with it. So I think we're going to respectfully disagree on that.
Well, would you agree that the war on drugs hasn't worked? But would you agree that the war on drugs that was launched by Reagan and others hasn't worked? We've actually seen an increase in drugs in America and elsewhere as a result, probably, of the war on drugs, which is what I think a lot of people would suggest.
Well, I think the war on drugs helped at the time, and then when other people came in and decreased that, I think that's when we had more problems. But I want to come to a point where we all agree, and I think that's education. If we educate, people are 6 times less likely to use. That's where we need to go with this. We can disagree with all of this other, and I don't think we're going to come to an agreement on that, but we will agree. I think all of us will agree that when we educate people about the dangers of this stuff, that we're going to help so many more people. They're 6 times less likely to use if we can get them educated on these facts.
Just really quickly, because we're wrapping up the show, the 2 things. One, and everything, because Shaq did a wonderful job of this yesterday and everything. So I'm not going to put you in a bind or anything by getting you to specifically say whether you are pro-Trump or pro-Harris or anything.
Oh, don't do it to the poor man. Leave him alone.
I said I wasn't gonna do that and everything, but I was gonna put another situation on him and everything, which I think he will agree with, and I think you'll agree because you did a great job of it in our extended program yesterday and everything. So, Dr. Wiggins, if you can tell us how they can get a copy of your book. Like I said, apparently Shaquille has already done that and everything. And if you want to let people know, because we've only got a couple of more days of early voting and everything, and all along those lines, and also on November 5th will be the election day, your thoughts about the importance of voting, no matter who you are voting for. So that's where I was going. I was going to give you an opportunity to talk just about the importance of voting in your own mind, no matter who you are supporting. So everything along those lines.
Absolutely. Please vote. We are given a right to vote in this nation, and we should use that. So I hope that all of you, whether you agree with what I'm saying here or not, would go out and vote. My book is Weeding Out the Myths About Marijuana, and you can find it on Amazon and wherever books are sold. Again, Weeding Out the Myths About Marijuana, and you can find a whole lot of resources and a lot of information about me and my books on drwiggins.com. That's drwiggins.com. And I hope you'll use those resources, and I hope you'll buy the book. And I always answer if someone emails me through the website. I'm always happy to answer questions for you.
I'll send you an email with me holding up the book from Australia, so you know it's gone far and wide.
Awesome.
Appreciate you, Dr. Wiggins. Appreciate you being our guest today.
Great
and hopefully
title.
You make a return trip in the near future. And like I said, I think that there was a robust discussion, and there were things that we agreed on, things that we disagreed on, and that's the kind of shows that I like on this kind of show. So I appreciate you being on and sharing your viewpoints, whether folks agree with you or disagreed with you, and all along those lines. But I thought some valid points were made, and look forward to hopefully having you back as a guest in the not too distant future, both on this show and other shows as well.
I would love to do it. It's been a great pleasure, and I really enjoyed talking with each of you. Great debate and great discussion. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you for your message.